I have a rule about animals in pain. It does not matter what kind of animal. It does not matter whether the animal is friendly, whether it is small, whether it has a good reason to be grateful. An animal in pain is an animal in fear, and an animal in fear will do the thing it knows how to do. A dog bites, a horse kicks, a cornered deer has ended more than one man who was only trying to help, and a drake. A full-grown war-trained Vareth blade drake, with a wing joint that has been out of socket for at minimum 3 days and a suppurating cut running diagonally from the base of his left jaw down to the hollow beneath his shoulder, plating. A drake like that will take your head off before he has had a chance to decide whether you deserve it. I knew all of that on the morning I found him in my supply yard. My name is Renna. I am 62 years old. For the last 11 of those years, I have run a fetal triage station at a place called Harthen Post, which sits on the western edge of the Soreth Plateau, a dry, wind-scoured table of land that has been contested territory for as long as anyone can. Remember, the post is 4 structures: the main clinic building, which has 12 beds and smells permanently of iodine; the equipment store, which I share with a supply runner named Brevet, who comes through every 10 days whether I need him or not; the generator shed; and the supply yard, which is really just a walled courtyard made of stacked stone, where I keep the cold stores and the bulk medical goods locked behind a steel gate. Post was built to serve anyone in the contested zone. Any species, any allegiance, any condition. That was the charter written when it was established, and I take the charter seriously. In 11 years I have treated Vareth drakes, human militiamen, a Palish border scout, 2 Koreth traders who had been ambushed on the high road, a juvenile Vareth who had gotten her left wing caught in a wire fence and was too proud to ask her unit for help, and one memorably ill-tempered Soreth plains lizard that had somehow gotten into the equipment store and eaten 3 boxes of compression bandaging. I had not before that morning treated a drake of the Vareth Blade Guard. I knew what he was before I got within 20 feet of him. The scale pattern was distinctive. That dark burnished bronze that catches the early light and makes it look like hammered metal with the thicker ridge plates across the dorsal line that the Blade Guard are bred for. He was lying flat against the cold store wall with his damaged wing folded as tight as he could manage, which was not very tight at all given the state of the joint. He was enormous, the ridge of his shoulder lying down to approximately my chest height. His head was longer than I am tall. He was watching me from the moment I came out of the clinic door. I stopped where I was. I set down the supply crate I was carrying. I did not move toward him, and I did not move away from him. I stood still, and I let him look at me. There is a particular kind of stillness you learn when you work around animals in pain long enough. It is not a performance. It is not a technique you read in a manual. It is simply the understanding that the animal does not know yet whether you are a threat, and the most useful thing you can do is give him time to work it out. You breathe. You keep your hands where they can be seen. You do not make the mistake of thinking that eye contact is dominance. Eye contact done right is acknowledgement. It says, I see you. I am not pretending you are not here. I am not walking toward you until you tell me whether that is permitted. I stood there for what must have been 4 or 5 minutes. The morning light was doing that low, sideways thing it does on the plateau in early autumn, laying long shadows across the yard. He was breathing in shallow pulls. The cut on his jaw was seeping. Not actively bleeding, but the fluid at the edges had the cloudy look that means the wound is older than 12 hours and begin to fight what it has no business fighting. After those 4 or 5 minutes, he made a sound. It was not a snarl. It was not the threat rumble I had heard from juvenile Vareth when I had approached them with instruments. It was quieter than both of those. It was low enough that I felt it in my back teeth before I heard it with my ears, and it resolved after a moment into something that had the shape, if not the sound, of a word. He said, please. I have thought about that word a great deal in the months since, what it means for a Vareth Blade Guard. The most decorated class of warrior the Vareth fielded in 3 centuries of conflict. Drakes who are trained from hatchlings, to show nothing, to give nothing away, carry pain in silence until it kills them if it must. What it means for a drake like that to lie in a stranger's supply yard at dawn and say, please, to a human woman he has never seen before. I think it cost him more than the wing joint. I picked up the supply crate, walked to the clinic door and put it inside. Then I went to the equipment cabinet just inside the entrance and got my kit bag and a second canvas bag that I keep packed for large patient work. I have modified the instruments over the years. Longer handles, wider gauge, heavier duty irrigation equipment. Because the charter says anyone, and anyone sometimes means very large. When I came back out, he was still against the cold store wall, still watching me. I did not approach directly. I set the bags down about 6 feet from where I estimated I would be working, and I pulled on my gloves, the heavy ones. Not because I was afraid of him, but because the infection risk goes both ways and I was not going to introduce anything into an already compromised wound. And then I crouched down to his eye level. Crouching rather than standing does something specific. It changes the geometry of the encounter. It says, I'm not above you, I am here. I'm Renna, I said. I run this post. I've treated Vareth before, including blade guard, though not. I glanced at the wing joint. Not quite like this. I'm going to have a look. If I do anything you don't want, you tell me. Don't tell me, you just move and I'll stop. All right? He regarded me for a long time, his eyes at close range. Extraordinary. The deep amber gold that the old Vareth illustrations always get slightly wrong. A little too yellow, when the real color is more like the last light before a storm. He lowered his chin 2 inches. I took that for yes. I started with the cut. Not because it was the most urgent problem. The wing joint was the most urgent problem. But because a wound you can visibly address gives the patient something to understand about your intentions. The cut was approximately 30 centimeters long, clean on the upper end, and ragged at the lower, which meant whatever had caused it had been moving when it made contact. A blade probably caught at the end of its arc. The edges had tried to close and failed because the movement of his neck kept pulling them apart. The infection was early stage. Manageable if we moved. I irrigated the wound. I have a pressurized irrigation rig for large patients. Because a hand squeeze bottle is useless against hide this thick, and the noise of the pump made him flinch the first time I triggered it. A full body tightening that went all the way down his tail. I paused. Just the irrigation rig, I said. It's noisy, I should have warned you. The tightening eased. I irrigated, debrided the ragged edges. Applied the broad spectrum compound I use for Vareth scale wound infections. It is a different formulation than the one I use for human tissue, and I had enough of it, barely, and put a field closure across the upper half of the wound where the gap was widest. The lower half I left open for drainage because closing an infected wound completely is one of the mistakes that turns manageable into catastrophic. He did not move during any of this. He made sounds, low, controlled sounds, kind that are not complaints, but are acknowledgments that something is happening. But he held himself with the steadiness of someone who has practice at tolerating discomfort, which, given what he was and what he did, he almost certainly did. The wing joint took longer. A wing joint dislocation in a full-grown drake is not a procedure you undertake lightly. The joint itself is roughly analogous to a shoulder. The mechanics are substantially more complex, because the wing must bear weight in 3-dimensional movement, folding, extending, the full sweep of flight. And a joint that has been out of socket for 3 or more days has muscle and tendon that have begun to compensate and tighten around the new wrong position. Reducing the dislocation means working against that compensation. It means moving the joint through the exact position that hurts the most in order to bring it back to the position where it hurts not at all. I explained this to him before I started. I do not know why I bother to explain procedures to patients who may not understand them, or who may not be in a state to follow what I am saying. I have done it since I was a young medic on my first posting, when my senior instructor told me to stop narrating, and I told her I would stop when it stopped helping. And I have done it ever since. It is not for the patient's benefit exactly, or perhaps it is in ways I cannot measure, but it is also for mine. It keeps me methodical. It keeps me from rushing. It keeps me honest about what I am about to do. The joint has been out for at least 3 days, I said, sitting back on my heels and looking at the wing with my hands on my thighs, not touching yet. The muscles have tightened. When I move it back, there's going to be a moment, just a moment. That's considerably worse than what you're feeling now. and then it should ease. If you can stay as still as you're able through that moment, it'll be cleaner and faster. If you move, stop and we'll take a breath and start again. There's no penalty. There's no rush. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he made a sound. Not the please sound. Something different. Shorter, more contained. A sound that, if a human had made it, I would have called a grunt of acknowledgement. I positioned myself at the joint. I placed my hands, both of them, all the weight I could bring, at the precise positions I needed. And then I moved the joint through its arc. He made a sound that I will not try to describe. It was not a scream. It was something below a scream, something that came from further inside him, and it lasted exactly as long as the worst of the movement lasted, which was perhaps 3 seconds. And then the joint seated itself with a sensation I could feel through my palms. A deep, heavy, unmistakable clunk of bone finding the place it was supposed to be, and the sound stopped. He lay very still for about 30 seconds. Then slowly, he extended the wing to its full span. It was an extraordinary thing to see in the confined space of the supply yard. The full span of a blade guard, swing, bronze dark and backlit by the morning sun, the leading edge running 10 feet above my head and the trailing edge brushing the far wall. He held it open for a moment, and then he folded it, and the fold was clean and smooth and level. He turned his head and looked at me. I was putting the instruments back in the kit bag, because the instruments needed to go back in the kit bag. And I had patients coming in the afternoon. I glanced up at him. "You'll need to rest the joint for 3 to 4 days," I said. "No flight. Short walks are fine, so long as you don't put weight on it. The infection in the cut is early enough that the compound should handle it, but I want to change the dressing twice a day. You're welcome to stay here until the wound is clean." He was still looking at me. "There's a lean-to on the east side of the post that's large enough," I said. "Built it for a Korath trader who was here for 2 weeks with a fractured hip. It's open on the south side, which means it gets the afternoon sun." He made a sound that I could not read. I finished putting the instruments away, stripped off the gloves and stood up. "I'll get you water," I said. "Do you eat?" "Of course you eat. That was a stupid question. I'll see what I have that's suitable." I went inside. I want to be clear about something. I was not unaware of what he was. I was not so absorbed in the mechanics of the work that I had failed to register that a Vareth blade guard had appeared in my supply yard, and that this was not a thing that happened in the normal course of any day. The Vareth Blade Guard are the standing tip of the Vareth War-Council's authority. They do not travel alone. They do not get separated from their units, unless something has gone very badly wrong, and they certainly do not end up wounded and alone on the Soreth Plateau in the pre-dawn dark. I was aware of all of this. I was also aware that none of it changed what I needed to do in the immediate term, which was irrigate a wound and reduce a dislocation and get clean water and something for him to eat. And I was aware that I could think about the larger questions once those things were handled. This is not a philosophy I arrived at through careful reflection. It is what the work taught me. The work has a direction when you are doing it. Next. Always next. What is the next thing the patient needs? And if you are doing it right, the next thing is always answerable, and you do not get lost. He was in the lean-to when I came back with water and a crate of the dried Vareth-grade protein I keep for large patients. He folded himself into it with the precision of someone who has learned to fit into spaces not built for him, which I suspected was a skill the blade guard developed early. The lean-to was large by human standards and adequate by his. He watched me set the water down. "I'll check the wound at midday," I said. "Sleep if you can." I went back to the clinic and opened the morning. His name, he told me on the second day, was Vareth War-Council. He told me this when I was changing the dressing on the jaw wound, which had improved significantly overnight, and was now showing the pink edge flush. That means clean tissue is beginning to close. He said the name without preamble, the way you state a fact you have decided someone is entitled to. "Renna Colt," I said, which was unnecessary since I had introduced myself the first morning, but the exchange seemed to call for it. "I know your name," he said. "There is a record of this post in the Vareth Field Registry. You have been here 11 years. 12 in the spring." 12 in the spring, he said. I had my hands in the wound and I did not look up. "The registry says anything else?" It says the post treats any patient, that it has never turned anyone away. That's the charter, I said. Yes, he said. I read the charter. I finished the dressing and stepped back. He flexed his jaw carefully, testing. The Vareth registry classifies this post as neutral ground, he said. I knew that when I came here. You came at night, I said, a pause. Yes. And you waited in the yard rather than knocking. Another pause, shorter. Yes. I began cleaning the instruments. I would have come out if you'd knocked. There's a bell pull on the north wall. I was not certain, he said, that you would. I looked up at him. He was looking somewhere past me at the wall of the supply yard. And there was something in the line of his jaw. Now that I was learning to read the lines of his face, that was not quite what I would have called embarrassment in a human, but was something in the same family. I was not certain, he said again more quietly, that a human would open the door. At night for me. I set the instrument down. I have thought about that too, in the months since. About what it means to be a Vareth Blade Guard. One of the most feared combatants in the contested zone. A Drake whose name the border militias exchange in the tone that people use for things they hope not to encounter. And to lie in a stranger's yard, and say please, and not to knock on the door, because you are not certain the door will open. The charter, I said, does not have a time restriction. He looked at me then, full on, amber gold. No, he said, it does not. The bell pull is on the north wall, I said. If there's a next time. He said nothing to that. I went back to cleaning the instruments. On the second morning, I brought him Vareth-grade protein and water, and checked the wound under the early light, and found it better than I had expected. The compound was doing its work. The cut had stopped seeping, and the cloudy fluid at the edges had cleared to something clean and pale. I told him this, and he listened the way he listened to everything. Not with relief, exactly. With the still attention of someone who is registering information that matters. You've had this treated before, I said. It was not a question. He looked at me. Not this wound. Other ones, I said. You know what I'm looking for when I check. You don't flinch at the irrigation rig anymore. Not because it doesn't surprise you, but because you categorized it the first time. That's not a first patient's response. A pause. Vareth Blade Guard units have their own field. 6, he said. I know. But they weren't here. Another pause shorter. No, he said, they were not. I did not push on that. How the blade commander of the Vareth Blade Guard had ended up separated from his unit on the Western Plateau was not my question to ask. What I needed to know was whether there were other wounds, other damage he had not mentioned. I asked him plainly, and he answered plainly, and the answer was no. The jaw cut and the wing joint were the sum of it, and I believed him, because he struck me as someone who would not withhold information about his own body when withholding it could produce a bad outcome. He was a tactical thinker. Withholding medical information from your medic is bad tactics. He was a difficult patient in all the ordinary ways, and an extraordinary one in the ways that mattered. Difficult. He did not like being still. He was built for movement, and 3 days of limited movement made him restless in a way that expressed itself as a very controlled, very contained fidgeting. Small adjustments of position, the tail moving, the claws very slightly retracting and extending. He did not complain. He simply could not be entirely still. I prescribed short walks in the late morning and again in the late afternoon, twice around the post perimeter, no more. And he took them with the punctuality of a man who has spent his life running to a schedule. Difficult also. He did not ask for things. Not for water when his container was empty. Not for food when I was late bringing it. Not for anything. I eventually told him, with some heat, that I needed him to tell me what he needed because I was running a clinic with other patients. And I could not always watch the yard. And he should not be dehydrated because he had decided not to bother me. He took this without visible reaction, and after that he asked. Extraordinary. He listened. When I explained a procedure, he listened completely. When I told him what I was seeing in the wound, he asked questions that demonstrated he understood the answers. When I told him the timeline for the wing joint, he adhered to it without argument and without cheating, which is more than I can say for most patients of any species who are given activity. Restrictions. Extraordinary also, he noticed things. On the second afternoon, when I was dealing with a human militiaman who had come in with a badly set fracture that needed breaking and resetting, Not a pleasant procedure, and not a quiet one. Vareth War-Council stood very quietly at the lean-to entrance and watched the yard. And when the militiamen left and I came outside to clear my head, the water container in my work area had been refilled. I looked at it and then I looked at him. "You moved on the wing joint," I said. "I carried the container on the other side," he said. I wanted to argue that it was still activity and he was still supposed to be resting. I looked at the container, full, and I looked at him, and I did not argue. "Thank you," I said. He turned and went back to the lean-to. The third morning, I woke before dawn and went out to check on a patient I had admitted the previous evening, a Polish trader with a respiratory infection that I was watching closely. When I came out of the clinic to cross to the equipment store, I became aware that there were 7 drakes on the ridge. They were not hiding. That was the first thing. They were standing on the ridge line, above the post, in the early dark, 7 of them, in the kind of stillness that suggests they have been there for some time. The ridge is perhaps 150 feet above the post. At that distance, in the dark, you would not see them unless you were looking. I was looking because I had learned, in 11 years on the plateau, to look at the ridge. I stopped in the yard and looked at them for a moment. Then I went to the equipment store, got what I needed for the Polish trader, went back in, handled the Polish trader, came back out, and went to the lean-to. Vareth War-Council was awake. He was sitting up with his good wing slightly extended, the way drakes do when they are alert and have been alert for a while. He looked at me when I came to the lean-to entrance. "There are 7 drakes on the ridge," I said. "Yes," he said. "Vareth, your unit," a pause. "Not my unit," he said, "the War Council." I considered this. "The War Council came to the ridge above my post." "Yes." "When did they arrive?" "They have been on the ridge," he said, "since the first night." I let that settle. The first night. He had been here 3 days, and the Vareth War-Council had been on the ridge above my post for 3 days, watching him, watching me, watching the supply yard at dawn and the lean-to at midday, and the twice-daily wound checks and the walk around the perimeter. "Why didn't you tell me?" I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I did not think it was relevant to your work." I looked at him. He looked back at me with the amber gold eyes that I was by now beginning to be able to read, and what I read in them was not deception. It was something closer to its opposite. A careful, deliberate separation of the thing I needed to do from the things that might have made it harder for me to do it. He had not told me because he thought the knowledge of 7 War Council drakes watching from the ridge might change how I handled the wound or reduce the joint, or told him to rest to the sing for 3 to 4 days and no flight. Short walks are fine, and he was not wrong that it might have. "The wound is clean," I said. "Another day and you can fly. The wing joint needs 1 more day of rest after that. 2 if you want to be cautious. You can be cautious." "I will be cautious," he said. I nodded. I was about to go back to the clinic when he said my name. "Medic Colt." I stopped. "The War Council," he said, "will want to come down this morning." I thought about this. "All right," I said. "They will want to speak with you." "That's their right," I said. "This is neutral ground. They can come down." He was quiet for a moment, then, "I wanted to tell you that before they arrived." I looked at him. Something in the way he sat, the particular care of it, told me that this was another version of the same thing he had said about the door. That he was telling me in advance so that I could decide how I stood before they came, rather than having the decision made for me by their arrival. "Thank you," I said. I went inside and put a pot of water on to heat, because it was cold, and I did not know how long whatever was going to happen was going to take, and I was not going to stand in a cold yard and talk to the Vareth War-Council without something warm to hold. They came down from the ridge at mid-morning. There is no other way to describe 7 Vareth War-Council drakes descending a plateau ridge formation except to say that the ground remembers it afterward. I have felt earthquakes on the plateau, small ones, the kind that rattle the instrument cabinet and leave a fine crack in the plaster above the clinic door. The descent of the War Council had a similar quality, except that it was deliberate and controlled, and the earth did not crack. It simply registered the weight of what was moving across it. They stopped at the edge of the supply yard. I was standing in the yard with my pot of tea. I looked at them. They looked at me. They were 7, as I had counted, all of them large. all of them bearing the dark bronze of Vareth's scale, with the ridge plate formation of the blade guard, or, in several cases, the heavier, wider ridge structure of the very old. Two of them had the gray edging on the leading wing scales that comes with significant age in a Vareth, the one at the center, slightly forward of the others, which told me something about the formation, was the largest, and had the deepest gray edging of any of them, and had eyes that were the same amber gold as Vareth War-Council's but somehow stiller. I thought, standing there, this is what the word council looks like in a body, not a committee, a weight. The large one at the center spoke. "You are the medic," he said. Not a question. "Renna, I said. "I run this post." "We know your name," he said. "We have been watching this post for 3 days." "I know," I said. "You've been on the ridge." He regarded me. "You noticed." "I noticed on the 3rd morning. I should have noticed sooner." I did not offer an excuse for that. There was not one that was worth offering. Pause. Something passed between the 7 of them that I could not read, not words, not exactly, the slight shifts of posture and attention that groups who have operated together for a very long time develop as a substitute for speech. Then the large one said, "We want to understand something." "All right," I said. "The Blade Commander," he said, and the way he said it made clear that he was speaking of Vareth War-Council, that this was the title, that the Drake in my lean-to was not simply a blade guard but the blade guard's commander. Piece of information I had not had and which I was filing away quietly. "The blade commander came here wounded, at night, on foot. He lay in your yard and you treated him." "Yes," I said, without knowing who he was. "I knew he was a Vareth blade guard," I said. "I knew he was wounded and in pain. That was enough to know." The council was very still. The morning light was doing its plateau work across the bronze of their scales, and the effect was, I will say it plainly, remarkable. It was like standing in front of a wall of hammered metal that had decided to pay attention to you. "The Blade Commander," the large one said, "is the right hand of the Vareth War-Council. He commands the enforcement of every treaty the Vareth hold on the Eastern Plateau. He is, in the assessment of 4 border militias, the most dangerous individual combatant currently operating in the contested zone." "I didn't know that," I said. "No," he said, "we know you didn't. That is what we want to understand." I thought about how to answer that. I looked down at the tea in my pot for a moment, and then I looked back at them. "He was in pain," I said. "He was in a spot in my yard where he couldn't easily see seen from the road, so he'd thought about where to lie down. He'd been managing the wound on his own for at least 3 days before he got here, which means he knows how to manage pain, and he'd hit the limit of what he could manage." He said, "Please." I stopped for a moment. "I've been treating patients on this plateau for 12 years. In 12 years I have never had a patient who asked me for help and did not deserve. I don't see why he would be different." The one to the large one's left said in a quieter voice, "He is Vareth." "Yes," I said. "I know." The quiet one said nothing further. The large one was watching me with those very still amber gold eyes, and I could not read him. Could not read the 7 of them, not the way I had slowly and partially learned to read the one in my lean-to, but I held their regard the way I had held his on the first morning. Still, hands visible, not looking away. "There is a thing the Vareth say," the large one said finally, "about those who have stood for us, when standing was not required." "I don't know your sayings," I said. "I know the charter." "The charter," he said, "was written by a human administrator who has been dead for 40 years and who never set foot on this plateau. It has no weight with us as a reason for what you did." "Then it's a good thing," I said, "that it's not the reason." The silence that followed that was a different kind of silence than the ones before. I have had moments in my life where I have said something and felt, in the aftermath, particular quality of a thing that has landed exactly as it should. Not sharply, not cleverly, just true and flush, the way a well-set joint settles. This was one of those moments, the large one. I understood by now that he was the senior member of the War Council, which made him, in the structure of Vareth authority, a position I did not have a human equivalent for, lowered his head. It was not a bow. I want to be clear about that. It was not the formal full-neck incline of Vareth ceremony, which I know only from description. It was something smaller and more deliberate. A single, slow lowering of the head, the great gray-edged crest dipping toward me, held for a moment, and then raised again. The 6 others did the same, one after another, left to right. 7 deliberate dips of 7 heads, each held for a moment, each raised. I did not know what to do with that, so I did what I usually do when I do not know what to do. I did the practical thing. He can fly in 2 days, I said. Not before. The joint needs the full rest, or we risk it re-dislocating under load, and then we're back at the start. The wound is clean. I'll do 1 more dressing change this afternoon, and 1 tomorrow morning, and after that, it should be stable enough to manage without daily attention. But he should have it looked at again in 10 days. The large one regarded me for a moment. We will see to it, he said. Good, I said. There was another silence, and then the large one said, Renna Colt, Field Medic, Hearth Post. Yes, I said. The War Council knows this name now, he said, and this post. The registry entry will be amended. This post will be, he paused for a moment, choosing the word with care, remembered. I did not know exactly what that meant in the operational language of the Vareth War-Council. I have since learned. I will come to that. Thank you, I said. And then, because they were still standing at the edge of my yard and I had a Palish trader inside with a respiratory infection that I needed to check on, was there anything else? The large one looked at me for a long moment. Something crossed his face. Something in the very particular territory of an expression that is entirely unexpected and is taking a moment to be processed, and then, very quietly, he made a sound that I had not heard from any Vareth before or since. If I had to give it a name, I would call it a laugh, not the sound a human laugh makes, but the same animal made from different materials. No, he said, there is nothing else. They went back up the ridge in the mid-morning light, and I went back into the clinic. Vareth War-Council left 2 mornings later. The joint had held well. The wound was as clean as I could make it and closing strongly on its own. I changed the last dressing while he was standing in the supply yard in the early light, the good wing half extended in the habitual way I had come to know as comfort rather than alertness, and I stepped back and stripped off my gloves and told him he was clear to fly. He folded the wing. He stood very still for a moment. Medic Colt, he said. Yes, I said. What the senior council elder told you, he said, about this post being remembered. I want you to understand what that means. I don't need it to mean anything, I said. You were a patient, you're well. That's enough. Nevertheless, he said. I want you to understand. He paused. The War Council holds 13 active treaty zones on the eastern and southern toe. In each of those zones, the Council's word is what determines safe passage, supply access, and escalation response. When the Council amends a registry entry, every unit, every patrol, every action in all 13 zones receives the amendment. I looked at him. He looked back at me. This post, he said, will not be approached without prior notification. It will not be a tactical target. It will not be a search point. Any Vareth unit operating within 50 kilometers of this location will be under standing orders to make provision. Provision is needed, available to this post's patients. Any patient, regardless of allegiance. I said nothing for a moment. 50 kilometers is a large circle on the plateau. That is considerable, I said. You reduced the wing joint, he said, of the blade commander of the Vareth Blade Guard in your supply yard, before you knew who he was. Because he was in pain and said please. He said it plainly, without inflection, the way you state a fact. But there was something in the plainness that was not plain at all. Charter, I started. Not the charter, he said, in the same even tone he had used with the council elder's echo. You told the council elder. The charter was not the reason. I was listening. I want you to know that I was listening, and that we heard what you said. I looked down at the instrument bag in my hands for a moment. Go rest the wing, I said. 10 days. Then if someone look at it, I will, he said. He walked to the center of the supply yard, opened both wings to their full span. That extraordinary bronze dark canopy, backlit now by the full morning sun, and lifted cleanly into the air. No hesitation in the joint, no compensation in the stroke. I watched him go until he was a moving point against the blue of the plateau sky, and then no point at all. Then I went inside and opened the morning. A year and some months have passed. The Palish trader with the respiratory infection recovered and sent me a consignment of Palish cold weather, grain that I did not know what to do with, but that Brevett the supply runner was thrilled about. The human militiaman with the badly set fracture came back 6 weeks later. The reset had held clean, and he looked embarrassed that he'd made as much noise about it as he had. Told him that was what noise was for and he should not feel bad about it. I have had 7 Vareth patients since Vareth War-Council. 2 of them mentioned, in the course of their visits, that the post was in the registry. One of them, a young patrol drake with a badly infected scale wound on his left foreleg, barely out of his adolescent coloring, said he had heard there was a field medic at Harthen who had treated the blade commander, and asked if it was true. He was a patient, I said. Yes. The young drake looked at me with the wide, very clear eyes of someone who is trying to reconcile something they thought they knew with something that appears to be true. And you didn't, I reduced the dislocation and treated the wound, I said. Same as I'm doing for you. Hold still. He held still. The War Council's amendment to the registry has had effects I am still mapping. There has not been a supply interruption at this post in 14 months, which is unprecedented in my 11, now 12, now going on 13, years here. Brevet the supply runner told me, last autumn, that the plateau militias had been asking questions about why Vareth enforcement patrols were giving Harthen Post a wide berth, and I told him I did not know anything about that, which was not quite true but was close enough. Vareth War-Council came back once, 4 months after he left. He landed in the supply yard in the late afternoon and folded his wings and stood there the way he had stood there on the morning of the 3rd day when I had told him the War Council could come down. I came out of the clinic. Wing or wound? I said. Neither, he said. Are healed. Good, I said. What do you need? He was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet, I understood that he had not come because he needed something in the way that patients need things. He had come because of some other kind of need, the kind that does not have a clean medical name. I wanted to check on the post, he said. Post's fine, I said. I thought about it for a moment. Come in. I'll put water on. He came in. He did not fit through the clinic door. His head cleared the lintel by about 2 inches, and his shoulders did not clear it at all. And we ended up with him standing in the doorway and me inside and a pot of water on the burner between us, which is an absurd arrangement but which worked in its way. We talked for about an hour. Not about the wing joint, not about the War Council, not about the registry or the treaty zones or the standing orders to the plateau patrols. About the post, about the patients I had had, about the Palish, cold weather grain. He told me, with the same matter-of-fact evenness he applied to everything, that the young patrol, Drake with the infected scale wound, had gone back to his unit and told everyone at the post they would be treated. You know they'll all come here now, I said. Any excuse, yes, he said. There was a pause. That's fine, I said. That's what the charter is for. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said something that I have turned over many times since, not because it was surprising, but because of how simply he said it. The same way he said everything, flatly, without ornament, as if stating something that had simply become true. They are not afraid of the door now, he said. I looked at him. He looked back at me, amber gold and steady. Good, I said. The water was ready. I poured my cup and handed him a wide basin I used for large patient hydration, and we stood there in the doorway of the clinic in the late afternoon light, and after a while I went back to work. And he went back to the plateau, and the post was still standing when the evening came on. It is still standing now. That is all there is to say about it, really. The post stands, charter holds, the door is open, and the bell pull is on the north wall. That was true before any of this happened. It is still true now. I do not think I did anything extraordinary. I treated a patient who needed treating, the same as every other patient who has come to this post in 12 going on 13 years. And I told them what I was doing while I did it, and I told them to rest, and they did. The fact that the Vareth War-Council came down from the ridge because of it is not a thing I fully understand. I understand the mechanics of it, the registry, the amendment, the 50-kilometer provision radius, the patrol standing orders. Understand the practical consequence of it, which is that this post has had 14 months without a supply interruption and can now treat a patient of any allegiance without the particular cold worry that it may attract the wrong kind of attention. I understand less well is why it mattered to them. Not the Blade Commander's recovery, that I understand. It matters to any unit when their commander returns to them. But the other part. The part where they stood on the ridge for 3 days and watched, and then came down and said they wanted to understand. The part where 7 War Council drakes lowered their heads in my supply yard, one after another. I think about what Vareth War-Council said. At the door of the clinic in the late afternoon light, they are not afraid of the door now. And I think about the first morning, and him lying against the cold store wall, and the long time he had been there before I came out, and the question he had been holding in the dark. Will a human open the door? I think that is what the 3 days on the ridge were about. Not evaluating the quality of the wound care, though I hope it was adequate, but a question they had not been sure they knew the answer to. A question about the door. I try not to think about that too much, 'cause if I think about it too much, I start to feel the weight of it, and the weight of it is considerable. All those patients who might have come and did not come because they were not certain the door would open. All those years of not being sure. That is a weight I am not able to do anything useful with, so I try not to carry it. What I can do is what I have always done. Open the door, have the instruments ready, put the water on, ask what they need, and listen to the answer, and do the next thing. The bell pull is on the north wall. That has always been true. It still is.